We'll call the meeting to order today of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. Today is committee day. We'll just be taking action in committees. The whole commission won't be voting. I do want to welcome you all to Gatlinburg. A little bit of snow on the ground. I see David Sexton trying to sneak away out there. I want to be sure and thank him for the fish fry. Great job. Danette, will you call the roll? I kind of like her not being able to see me. She cannot give me signs.
Excuse me.
But I got Becky sitting there looking at me, and that's trouble.
Dennis Gardner.
Here.
Jimmy Granberry.
Here.
Steve Jones.
Here.
Connie King. Jim Ripley.
Here.
Tony Sanders.
Here.
James Stroud. Kent Woods.
Here.
Tommy Woods.
Here.
Hank Wright.
Here.
Angie Box.
Here.
Ron McLaren.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. We do have a few special guests with us today. We've got Mr. Leonard Ezel from the Highland Sportsman Club, Mr. Jeremy Hooper from TDEC, and Catherine Barnes from TDEC. I would like to ask the commissioners that after this meeting, if y'all could stay in, we got a little something we want to do with Region 4 office. If y'all can stay in here with their administrative staff immediately following this meeting. I know Miss Becky Hensley's here, and her mom and sister are also here today with her, so glad to have them with us. Director Carter, do you have any announcements? I've got one announcement, and it seems like it's every month I'm mentioning that Director Carter has been honored for some award or some, and they're not just any award. They're I would call them prestigious awards. But Director Carter, I know you just arrived back from I think Springfield, but anyway, he was presented the Conservation Partner of the Year by Mr. Johnny Morris. There was about 2,000 people there. To give you an idea of what that means, it's not a yearly award, but some of the past award recipients are George Bush, Jimmy Carter, and there's some others. But anyway, just wanted to be sure we recognize you for that. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of, being in school, all the awards I got. But no, I'm serious. But just proud of you once again. So congratulations on your award. One more guest, Mike Butler, Tennessee Wildlife Federation, just walked through the door, so I'll get him out of the way. All right. I'll call on our wildlife chairman, Commissioner Dennis Gardner.
All right, Chuck, you ready to go over the CWD stuff?
Testing. Couldn't sound any better. All right, good afternoon, commissioners. It's me again, Margaret. I want to, for the next few minutes, give you an update on what's happened since the last time I presented 2 months ago in regards to chronic wasting disease. It's lots going on, lots happening, so it's always important to bring you guys up to speed, and hope to do that over the next few minutes. And in doing so, I'd like to highlight a couple of things while sharing results, and that is the CWD sampling effort that we've had. It's been a very large effort, a very big effort, and then also the disposal work that we've been doing. So there's a lot of there's a lot of pictures in this presentation, so it'll work well for the chairman, and we'll move forward with that plan. And to remind you, the latest as far as having high risk or positive counties, we have 5 positive counties, and 5 high risk counties. And again, high risk being that CWD has been found 10 miles within those, or 10 miles from those counties. So that's the latest as far as high risk and positive counties. And I wanted to share with you on the front end here some results from the deer season this year. And this is a simple, very simple, maybe oversimplified comparison of this year versus last year. You know, we were real interested in what was going to happen with the deer harvest in the affected area, and hoping that it would not decrease much, if any, and, you know, ideally it would increase for disease management. So I wanted to share what the results are thus far. And in Unit CWD, and that's limited to 8 counties, because if you'll remember that Gibson and one other, Gibson and Crockett, was not added to Unit CWD, so it comprises of the 8 remaining counties. But in that unit, there's been an overall decrease of 11%. However, there's been a 2% increase in the buck harvest and a 27% decrease in the doe harvest. So unfortunately, the deer harvest hasn't done exactly what we had hoped it would, and it'll be interesting to see how it ends up in the end. However, it is concerning that the doe harvest has decreased there, and that we kind of broke even on the bucks. But what this will mean is that there'll be more does there this spring having fawns, and is going to be a further challenge for us. So just wanted to share those results, and by comparison, the statewide, we've seen a 9% decrease overall, and this is year to date, so it's deer season up to this point in comparison to the same time last year. But statewide, we've also seen a 7% decrease in bucks and 11% decrease in does. As far as the CWD spatial distribution, not much has changed since the last time we met. As we go further through the season, we're more confident that we know how much disease is out there and exactly where it is, and not much has changed in that regard since the last time we met. However, there has been I believe maybe just one additional positive in Madison County, but we are seeing more positives in Madison County, and expect that to continue. Not as much as we found in Fayette and Hardeman, obviously, but those places where we're finding isolated chronic wasting disease are very significant, and I'll share more about that now. What is significant about that is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, their best management practices for the management of CWD. They say, or they recommend, that management should include utilizing harvest, targeted removal, or other removal mechanisms combined with statistically appropriate sampling and testing to monitor changes in prevalence. And I say that to go back and look at the distribution again. And if things continue on like we're seeing, and I expect we've got a fairly good idea, and I think it'll look like this pretty much at the end of deer season. But we're going to have to think about the option of partnering with landowners in those areas where there's just a dot and it's isolated, and think about additional harvest there. And other states, the way that they've accomplished that is through the Wildlife Agency, getting permission from the landowner, working closely with them, and the agency did a lot of the work as far as the shooting. And then there's a lot that goes along with that as far as disposal and utilization of the deer and that sort of thing. So very soon we'll have to think about whether or not we utilize that option or not, realizing that that's probably something that should be done eventually in those areas where there are those sparks or those isolated cases of chronic wasting disease, because obviously you don't want those sparks to ignite or to, you know, to cause another spark in the nearby area. In other words, keep the disease from spreading and control it. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So now I'll share about the intensive CWD sampling that's been happening. The picture on the left there is from one of our mandatory physical check stations. You'll remember that we had that for 2 weekends during the opening of muzzleloader and opening of gun over in Unit CWD minus 2 counties. And that effort, we had kind of mixed results with that. We got some good sampling done. Some stations were terribly slow, but some were fairly good. So overall, it balanced out to where it was worthwhile. But we learned some things we've learned some things since then that we believe we may be able to get an adequate number of samples without requiring that of hunters and without having to man those stations. So we'll consider that more in the future. But I just wanted to give you a heads up for the future that we may not have to take that step. So you may not see that recommendation for next deer season. But again, I'm not sure just yet. So that was the mandatory physical check stations, but then there's the sampling effort, like from the freezer program where hunters bring us heads for sampling, and that picture on the right is one of our staff doing that work. So now I wanted to highlight the sampling lab where all this is happening. You'll recall that kind of rough picture there on the right of a salt room that's been converted at a local processor called Custom Processing in Meaden, Tennessee. So that we've partnered with them and are doing a lot of the sampling there for the heads that we get from hunters, and then also processing samples that we get from processors and taxidermists that are actually taking the samples and passing them on to us to submit for testing. So we've converted that facility. I showed you last time and really bragged on how the Region 1 folks were able to convert that room to what you see there on the right. And that's the area that they've been utilizing. And I'll kind of show you a little bit more of the room. And it literally is a room. I think it's 280 square feet. It's about half the size of the stage behind you. So it's pretty tight quarters, but it's worked well. And I'm worried about us wearing out our welcome, but it's been working very well for us. Those guys have done a remarkable job with it. And these are just some pictures of it. You can tell it's fairly tight in there, but those guys are working like crazy. It reminds me of a Waffle House. You know, you go in a Waffle House and it's real efficient. There's too many people in there, and you probably shouldn't be eating there. You know, all these things that it reminds me of. But anyway, but it's real efficient, and it's worked very well. And everybody's working hard, so it is. It's just like a Waffle House. But anyway, so those guys are working. There's a lot of part-time technicians that you see in that photograph. And the director will have to pardon me that the uniform directive got a little iffy at the lab because of the nature of the business that we're in. But what we're doing, and my pictures are going nuts here because I'm punching it too much, the clicker. But so these are the form of the heads that they come in. They come in these barrels in the bags, and we're processing those. And so we take them out, and then you'll see there on the right, that's kind of random. We're getting some random stuff, and that one on the right had a log chain wrapped around it and was left in the freezer. So I just wanted to share that as something strange that's come up. So our staff are then working with the deer and processing it. Another thing that's happening there is, like I said, the processors and taxidermists are passing on samples to us. And that picture on the left is jaw bones. So these processors and taxidermists are going as far as taking the samples out, the lymph nodes out, packaging them in those little packages, and then taking the jaw bones of the deer and giving those to us, and we can age the deer from those jaw bones. And I'm just blown away that we were able to do that this deer season, because several of us were interested in seeing if we could pull that off, but I doubted that we could, and they have. So it's a lot more efficient way to get samples. And then the picture there on the right is one of our staff. What he's doing, he's aging that one of those jaw bones, reading it off to the other staff member there that's capturing that data. So these are a collection of samples. These are all lymph nodes that eventually end up in the freezer. and then their package is sent to Colorado via FedEx. So that's the process there. One of the other challenges that goes along with this is a ton of paperwork. There's a lot of information to manage to try to be able to know whose is whose and what deer it belongs to, and communicating those results to hunters. So a big monumental task is also data management that's also done there on site. And you see some of our staff there are putting information either in the computer, or there's a lot of technicians there around the table that are catching up on data entry and using the iPads that we have available there. So that's the work happening there at the Waffle House, or the sampling lab. And these are the results. These are the results as of yesterday, and this is what we have. The very bottom is the statewide, so we're over 8,700 samples there, and you see that we're up to 148 positives. That's this fiscal year, or you might as well say this deer season. So that's what we have for sampling statewide, and a lot of those are still pending, but we'll have those results soon. And these are the positives that we have. This is showing last year versus this year, and you'll see we're up to 334 for the 2 years. And these are the prevalence rates that we currently have, with the worst being in Fayette County. And Hardeman's not good either. And it kind of gives you, this graphics kind of gives you, or table gives you the idea that maybe Hardeman's not as bad as Fayette, but they're both, those prevalence rates are pretty high. And I think the 6.2 is a little diluted because of the fact that the core of this is at the county line of Hardeman and Fayette. All right, so moving on, that was the sampling work, and now we're at the disposal issue. You'll remember that we had the issue where landfills across the state told us, or they changed their policy, that they weren't interested in accepting deer unless they were deemed CWD free, the ones coming from the affected area, or what I'm referring to. And we were concerned by this because the fear of indiscriminate disposal and how that might jeopardize disease management, and knowing that a lot of folks, a lot of hunters rely on meat processors, and they dispose of a lot of deer. So quickly we began to work with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture and TDEC to develop a short-term and a long-term plan to address this. And you'll remember from the last meeting that we felt one of the actions that needed to be taken immediately was to create a burial site. And it wasn't an ideal situation, but we wanted to be responsive and help our stakeholders. So we did that. And I wanted to kind of give you a tour of that quickly. And this is at Wolf River near Rossville, and wildlife management area, that is. And this is near a right-of-way. So this area that you see, the power line right-of-way, we constructed a road there that you see on the right, and constructed a fence around that area to exclude people and wildlife as best we could. And this is the gated entrance to that property. It's right near where you saw the power line right away. This is what you'd see if you went there. So you've got some excavation there. You've got a trench there that's being dug, which is then lined with clay, which is helpful for binding prions, the infectious agent. And so we lined that trench with clay. And then we put deer parts in that, and then we put more clay on it, and then we covered up, as you see there on the picture on the right. So that's what it looks like. That's what it is. That's been good, a good thing to do. It was unfortunate that we had to do it, but I'm glad we did it, and I'm very proud of how quick we did it, how well we partnered doing it, and I'm excited about the fact that TDEC has been so complimentary at how our staff have managed that. So we've done a good job with that, and wanted to share that with you. So now moving on to the long-term plan, we told you last time that we were going to re-engage the landfill companies in the affected area. We have done that with not so good results from the major company over in that area. However, we have talked to, in addition to Waste Management, and they are interested in working with us potentially regarding the management of ash that comes from the area once we're doing incineration. So we'll continue having that discussions with them. We've also had discussions with the folks at the Dyersburg landfill about potentially using that site and transferring carcasses there. I don't think we're going to do that in the near future. However, they're preparing, and I think they're going to be an outlet if Dyer County ever were to be positive. And they may even be open to receiving carcasses from high-risk counties sooner than that. So there's potential there, and we'll just monitor that, and hopefully that'll work out someday. All but the part about CWD and Dyer County. I hope that never happens. But and then the use of incinerators. We talked about that last time. We have 2 now, and there's plans regarding a permanent one. We've got 2 portable ones. Those are the smaller units, obviously, and then the permanent ones that we're making, or one that we've got plans for that Assistant Director Richardson will share about in a few minutes. So here's the incinerator that we've purchased, and that came from a Georgia company. We just received it, but that's what that unit looks like. One thing that stuck out to me is that picture on the right. You see at the bottom there's a little door, and that's where the ash comes out. I just didn't know, but I thought there'd be more sophistication to the management of ash from these. But these are the things that we wanted to start working with incinerators so we could learn the ropes, and that's one of the first things we learned is that, wow, this thing's really tall. It's going to take something special for us to efficiently and safely get deer carcasses in it, and then we're going to have to do something about that ash and put a tray there, an efficient way to collect that without endangering the environment or our staff. So that's that, and we even ended up getting what I call the eliminator. It's another incinerator that Commissioner McMillan graciously offered to us. And you see some great work there by Region 4 to get that thing to West Tennessee, and we just recently got that. And the reason I call it the Eliminator is because it has the name Eliminator on it. I just thought that was catchy, so anyway, that's what that's about. But we're grateful for that, and grateful for Region 4 for getting that to us, because it weighed, I think, 7 tons, and we had no idea that that was the case until right before we had to move it. So they did a great job with that. All right, real quickly, some other things that's happened is as far as communications work, we're now doing a briefing call with partners, with our sister state agencies and the Wildlife Federation every 2 weeks to keep them as informed as we can, and to grow those partnerships. So we're doing that now. We've had 2 public meetings and had a decent crowd at one and a great crowd at the other. So those were good interactions for us. We've also learned that the College of Veterinary Medicine may be very interested in becoming a diagnostics lab, so we're working on that with them. And that's what I have for my summary, and I'll take any questions if you guys have any.
All right, thanks, Chuck. I always appreciate the updates on there, and I know y'all had to deal with some contentious debates over the use of the burial of the carcasses, and I appreciate the professionalism and the ability to explain your position and the needs for it to the people around there, and try to get everybody on the same page. I thought that went better than I was or as well as I hoped for, I guess.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for that. Anybody have questions to Commissioner Granberry?
Chuck, what are other states doing to try to incentivize people to take does, to harvest more does? Obviously, if they're saying not to eat them, then people are really not going to shoot them. I assume that's part of the reason the harvest is down so dramatically.
Dan, do you have anything to add that we haven't already tried through our last package? Dr. Grove, excuse me. Not really. Yeah, I think they've basically, developed regulations like we have. There may be some opportunities through more outreach and more education and kind of partnering closer with the hunters to encourage them even more. So I think there's some opportunities, and there's also some more hunting regulations things that could happen, and we'll be considering those and have a recommendation for those for next year's season when we go through season setting in April and May.
Last question, after the end of the deer season, as you give another report, can you compare our prevalence rates to other states that
Sure.
have done good and have done bad? I know there's been a lot of talk that some states have not done a good job and others have done a really good job. So it'd be nice to see how we stack up.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Just have a question, Chuck. I know Unit CWD, I think it's 8 counties, the harvest data is down. We started earlier, and it's still down. Do you have any Hardeman and Fayette County results on harvest data? How does that season to date, is that down even further? If you could break that out, or do you have that?
Yeah, it mirrors what I shared for Unit
Okay.
CWD.
So no different, just
Right,
down
yeah.
about the same. And then any data on age class reduction of the deer now? I guess that you're aging these deer that we're testing, do we see any data that shows an age class reduction of bucks or does?
We hadn't done that level of analysis, but
We don't have it from
we'll be
before.
able to.
We don't have it from before, probably. We will now, but yeah.
Well, at some level, we will have earlier years, but certainly with the processor program even more so, and the aging that we're doing for the samples we take from hunters.
All right, any other questions, anybody?
I got one.
All right, Chairman?
Chuck, it's also fair to say that the statewide numbers are down, and that what we're seeing in those counties may or may not be contributed to CWD. Is that a fair thing right now? I mean, it seems
Yeah.
even in my county, I know,
Yeah, I
the
think-
number of hunters is down. It seems to be some of our counties across the state that normally have really large numbers are really way down. So it seems to be a statewide problem.
Yeah, that antlerless harvest is what we need to watch the closest once the season's over.
Yeah, I've got a note I wrote down during your briefing. If these stats remain constant throughout the rest of the season, I would really like to try to figure out some way to incentivize doe harvest. It seems like that's been a struggle even prior to CWD. Your doe populations get high, people get the deer they want off the 1 or 2 bucks they kill a year, and it's just not been an effective way to get people on board as far as shooting the does. I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, there's got to be something you can do that helps that along. I just hadn't figured it out, but I'm certainly going to work on that. And can you elaborate on the plan to get your samples? You said you wouldn't need the check stations, but you really didn't go into any detail. You mind explaining how you'd get them? Is it through processors? Is that the main source?
Well, I just start with a caveat that I'm not exactly sure if we'll recommend having those mandatory physical check-ins or not. I suspect that we won't. And the reason, we've got a lot of samples from over there. We're getting sufficient numbers. We're surpassing our surveillance goals. And the freezer program has been so popular. I prefer to recall it the sampling drop-off station, which I make that mistake regularly. But that has been so successful. And if we can continue to partner with those processors and taxidermists, that's also a very efficient way of doing it. So the combination of those, I think we could meet our surveillance goals without requiring the mandatory physical check stations.
When you mentioned waste management earlier, but the one that's not wanting to work with us at all, is that Republic?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'd just say that the landfills in the affected area, the privately owned ones, are owned and managed by Republic, and they've interacted with TDEC the most, which they're here. Some of their representatives are here today, okay. and we've kind of had conversations through them, and they've just communicated their policy, and they're pretty firm in that.
All right, and it's one last thing. What's the capacity on those portable incinerators?
1,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds in how many hours?
Well, we have, I can't say for sure because we haven't filled it up with 1,000 pounds yet to see, but based on what the manufacturer told me, I believe it's a 6 to 8 hour burn.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions, comments? All right, thank you very much, Chuck.
You're welcome.
Is that all? At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Jeremy Hooper from TDEC to say a few words. Whatever you're, yeah. Go ahead and go there.
Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me. Thanks for having me. Get this turned on real quick. Okay. So thanks for everybody for coming out. Thanks for inviting us and having us and giving us the opportunity to speak. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, commissioners, today. My name is Jeremy Hooper, and I work for TDEC, the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, the Division of Solid Waste Management. Our commissioner, David Sawyers, could not be here today and asked myself and Catherine Barnes, who is with me from OGC, to come and say a few words on his behalf since chronic waste and disease is on your agenda. We've been working very closely with TWRA, as you're aware, on this issue and are very happy to be here. So got a couple points I just want to say here. As you know, TWRA came to us at TDEC after the landfills within the zone, the current CWD management zone, informed TWRA that they would no longer be accepting deer carcasses. We were asked to join a working group with TWRA and the Department of Ag, and we were happy and continue to be happy to do so. And I'm happy to say that the group has worked well and has been very productive in navigating this complicated issue pertaining to disposal. Other states, as you are aware, mostly in the West, have been dealing with CWD for many years, and TDEC has reached out to numerous representatives in those states to get guidance on how to manage disposal. So most of the states that we've talked to take a multi-pronged approach. However, in all those states that we've talked to, they all have some level of landfill participation as an option. Currently, in Tennessee, we do not. So I want to reiterate that. Currently in Tennessee, we do not have a landfill option. So as an example of what the other states are currently doing, Minnesota, we spoke with, they use incineration, alkaline digestion, and landfilling. Wisconsin uses incineration and landfilling. None of these states that we talked to utilize burial like we are currently using at Wolf River. Through our conversations with these states and the larger landfill companies, we have noted trends regarding landfills across the country not accepting deer carcasses in the future. So continuing on this trend. These states anticipate incineration and possibly alkaline digestion becoming a larger part of their management moving forward because of this trend. Therefore, TDEC believes that it's important to consider various options that do not include burial and anticipate the continued lack of landfilling as an option. So of the three viable options, incineration, alkaline digestion, and landfilling, TDEC believes that incineration is the best option. Incineration kills the prion at a certain temperature, as you're aware, which is also why an incinerator that reaches 1,800 degrees is preferable. Moreover, our discussions with landfill companies suggest that they would be willing to take ash from incineration that reaches this temperature. In addition, incineration is also a good option because it significantly reduces the volume of waste material that has to be managed. With that said, TDEC acknowledges that incineration can also be very expensive. So therefore, we would like to find a combined approach of incineration with landfilling, whether that's burning to 1,800 degrees or a lower temperature. If the ash is burned only at a lower temperature, then best management practices for landfills are critical, as the science on the ability of the prions to enter into the landfill leachate is, from TDEC's perspective, still developing. Private landfills have not committed to taking any ash, but if it can be demonstrated that the carcasses have been incinerated to that temperature, These companies may be willing, as they've told us, to accept this ash. Also, based on our discussion with elected officials from the area in which the current burial is taking place, people see incinerating the carcasses as a better option than burial. So alkaline digestion is also a viable option, but may be prohibitive from a cost and resources perspective. However, TDEC supports any effort that TWRA may make in securing digestion as an option. TDEC does not see burial as utilized at Wolf River as a long-term solution or as a component of the solution for next season. We've discussed this with TWRA as well as the necessity of finding a long-term solution now, well before the start of next deer season. Under state regulations, burial over a longer period of time or a more extensive area requires the site to be considered a landfill, thus going through an extensive and expensive permitting process. So with all that said, I'd like to thank you guys again for letting me speak before you today and express Commissioner Sawyer's thoughts on this issue. TDEC remains ready to provide support and guidance to TWRA and the Commission throughout this process, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate the briefing, and also want to say that I appreciate y'all's the way TDEC and TWRA are working together and recognizing that it's not just a TWRA issue, and that it's a statewide issue, and I appreciate that. Anybody have any questions or comments to Mr. Hooper? Chairman?
Jeremy, I got one question.
Sure.
A lot of these landfill companies obviously run landfills in other states. I hunt in Illinois and Indiana, and I know Republic runs landfills up there.
Yeah.
So are they allowing those deer to be dumped up there and not here, or are they?
No.
Is that a?
That's a nationwide policy, and so the closest. So to give you an example of how that sort of looks in another state, Wisconsin, of the states that TDEC has spoke to, Wisconsin is the closest thing to us in terms of landfills saying no to carcasses, and that's because Waste Management has a heavy presence up there, and they've had quite a few landfills because of that pull out.
Okay, thanks.
So no, that is a national policy.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? I've got just one. You said in TDEC's opinion, the prions in the leachate and the science on that is not complete. Can you elaborate on that? Because I had heard that when you use clay, that they move a minimal amount within a clay structure.
Sure. Yeah, so based on the researchers that we've spoken with from places like Creighton University, Nebraska, and the research that we've read on our own and been provided by Dr. Grove, a lot of it is based on, or most of it's based on laboratory settings. And so when you bring that to the landfills themselves, they're not always confident that that is what reality is going to be. And so that's kind of our perspective on that. And some of the researchers I've spoken with have said that they're trying to address those types of concerns but are looking for funding. So in other words, our perspective on that is, will those lab results still play out in the real world where you're putting stuff into a waste mass that is very dynamic and has a lot of constituents that change the environment?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I get all of that, and I can understand where their apprehension would be, but this stuff has been around since the 60s. You've got places out in Colorado that have been disposing of deer carcasses for a long time. Mm-hmm. It seems like that's a live operation that could be tested and back up some of the science behind what the laboratory's doing. Is that
agree? And so I've only spoke with a couple of researchers about continuing science on that end, and what they told me is that it's just a funding issue, and then getting a landfill on board. So the landfill itself has to be willing to say, yeah, you can test my leachate, and if you find it, you won't get mad at me, because one of the concerns from the landfill is wastewater treatment plants across this country have turned them away because of that.
Okay, thank you. I guess it makes more sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would allow that testing to go on in my landfill as well.
Not that we don't support it. We can't tell them they
Sure.
can't, yeah.
Sure, I get it. All right, well, thank you very much. If nobody has anything, we appreciate the briefing. And I call Chris Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. They covered the science really well. Now, I want to come and ask you for a whole bunch of money. So this is probably going to take a little work from both the Wildlife Committee and the Budget Committee, and maybe Commissioner Sanders can jump in after I kind of outline what I'm going to ask for. Certainly, disposal is being an issue of concern. You all have seen some of the news media outlet articles and things that have been put forth about the temporary disposal pit in Rossville. I'm sure that Commissioner Wright has phones been ringing off the hook as well as many of your phones as well. We agree with TDEC in the sense that the burial site at Wolf River is temporary and is not going to be able to continue to be utilized beyond this season. And so we are starting to work and formulate our plan in conjunction with both TDEC and the Department of Agriculture to figure out what may work long term. And everyone agrees that that's going to take a multi-pronged approach, and we're not taking any options off of the table, but we do need to move forward with getting some of these safer, I shouldn't say safer, some of these more palatable options from a public perspective going, because as you all know, state process takes time, procurement takes time, and we're only about 10 months from next deer season right now. So we have a plan, I guess you would say, to work with one of the local governments in the CWD area, affected area, that being Fayette County. Fayette County has offered to partner with the state to locate and operate a large-scale incinerator at their construction landfill in Fayette County. That's a significant offer from the county, and they want us to help them with acquisition of an incinerator, and if we can help them get an incinerator placed, they've agreed that they will house it, they will operate it, and they will dispose of that ash in their landfill there on site. We've done a lot of work, Dr. Grove, Chuck, and others, in kind of trying to get up to speed on incinerators. I went and crawled around in an incinerator just this week at Cord Lab there on campus at Ellington. They are not really complicated machines. They are expensive machines, and they are machines that take a lot of effort to keep running appropriately. But basically, it's something that gets really hot and reduces whatever you put in it to ash. So the ask that I have of the commission today is to approve a budget expansion of $1 million to allow us to move forward with the design and procurement of a large-scale incinerator, one that reaches 1,800 degrees, to be placed at the Fayette County construction landfill and hopefully be in operation by the next deer season. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have or discuss it any further.
I guess the main thing, can you elaborate on where the 1 million is proposed to come from?
The proposal from the agency is the $1 million would come from the TWRA's rainy day fund.
All right. With no government, no PR money or?
This certainly, we're going to take every opportunity with the state dollars that we spend to seek reimbursement federally. I don't want this to sound as if we are spending, $250,000 of state money and getting $750,000 of Fed money. We may in fact be able to qualify this project for reimbursement. But what I'm asking you to do today is to approve the TWRA to spend $1 million of state money to put this incinerator in place.
All right, any questions from the committee first? Mr. Chairman. All right,
Chris, is
Commission,
there-
go ahead, Mr. Ripley.
Thank you. Are there any sources of federal funds like U.S. Fish and Wildlife where they're helping states that might be called on to help us in this situation?
There may be some opportunities. We need to talk with our friends at the USDA. Certainly, we are going to make every effort, and I think there is a likelihood that this project may in fact qualify for wildlife restoration dollars. So that would be federal money that can offset some of the state costs.
Mr. Granberry.
Chris, what's the proposed annual cost to operate this machine? And I think it's probably seasonal because you wouldn't be doing it all season. And is there any, that's question number one. And question number two, is there any, working with the county or the region, is there any way to offset the operating costs by using this in the off-season for other uses like hospitals or, you know, other waste that could be brought to our
At this point, TWA has not offered nor discussed the operational costs. What we're looking to do is to procure and install an incinerator for Fayette County. We would retain a security interest in that equipment, but ultimately it would be Fayette County's incinerator. We would expect them to pay the operational costs and to generate revenue to cover those costs, whether that be through some level of disposal fees associated with deer carcasses, or that is a business model and business plan that allows them to incinerate other things during the off-season. I think all those things are on the table. And I would also offer that the discussion, we had a meeting with the Lee administration the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. TDEC was present, Department of Health was present, Department of Agriculture was present, ECD was represented, and of course executive level staff from the governor's office along with elected officials from Fayette County. And the governor's office did make an offer to Fayette County to help them develop a business plan that would help offset or support the operational costs of the incinerator. So at this point, we're not asking for any dollars for operation, and it would be my intention to help Fayette County along, but that ultimately they would be responsible for the operational costs, independent of any TWA funds.
to those operational costs? I assume you mean long-term maintenance as well on $1 million piece of equipment?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Commissioner Wright.
Chris, let's assume our problem's going to grow and spread to other counties. We hope it doesn't, but, you know, what's the range of number of counties this can serve? And is this, you know, I'm guessing there are going to be others placed going forward, or what's your outlook on that?
It's a very fair question, and one that I don't know that I have a real concise or clear answer to. I don't want to give any impression to anyone here or anyone that might be listening that this $1 million incinerator is somehow a magic bullet that is going to solve all of our disposal issues. It's not. We're going to have to continue to look for a multi-pronged approach. There may still, in fact, be burial that goes on at some point. We may be able to work with a landfill on the municipal level that ends up taking carcasses like Dyer County, as Chuck had referenced. We also are going to have to look at perhaps a plan to utilize some of the smaller scale incinerators like we have procured here to reduce volume to make the larger incinerator more effective or more efficient at burning more material to 1800 degrees. So at this point, all I can tell you is that we're hoping through conversations with a incinerator manufacturer that we can have some system put in place for that $1 million that can burn at least 5 to 6, 7, 8, 10,000 pounds a week, depending on how it can run and how often it has to be cleaned out. The biggest problem with incinerators is not how much material necessarily that it can consume in a period of time. It's how long you have to wait for it to cool down before you can clean it out. The incinerator that I was crawling around on at Cord Lab, they have to let that thing cool down for 3 days before they can clean out the ash. So you are going to have some dead periods where you're not able to burn, and developing a plan and a system for how those carcasses get fed into the incinerator and how long you can continuously burn before you have to have a clean out is all critical. It's not as simple as just saying this is a 5,000 pound, 6,000 pound incinerator. A lot of it, how much it can consume, will have a lot to do with how it's operated.
Last question, I'm sorry. Have we looked at data of this, say, the 8-county CWD zone, and we look at harvest data? Does this incinerator have the capacity to do those, that level of harvest, this one? I mean, those are high harvest counties. Just curious. I didn't know.
I think the answer, I think the answer is yes. I mean, it could. Now, how long, how much time it takes? Are you going to have to figure out a storage option to store some carcass parts for a period of time in order to get them worked through the incinerator? That would certainly be possible. If you think in terms of this incinerator might have the ability to consume, let's just say ballpark 5,000 pounds of material per day on average throughout the week, that would essentially be 100 deer per day in carcass parts. The way we've estimated is that after a deer is processed, there's approximately 50 pounds of waste left over. So if you're burning 5,000 pounds a day, you're doing 100 carcasses a day. I think Chuck probably has some ballpark estimates on what we have utilized as far as the management pit at this point, but it would take a considerable amount of days of operation for this incinerator to work through that much material. That's why we're going to continue to focus on the feasibility study with the smaller incinerators to see if we can have a volume reduction on the front end and then bring the ash to the 1800 degree incinerator to finish burning it to a safe level where we know the prions have been destroyed.
Commissioner Ripley?
Chris, since we're a statewide agency, I guess my concern is, will we work this deal in such a way that Fayette County will accept Hardeman County deer?
Yes.
Okay, there's no question about that.
There's no question. If we're going to grant Fayette County the money
Yeah.
to do an incinerator as part of that grant contract, they will be asked and required to take deer from all over and Mayor Taylor has been very, very good to work with. They've been a very willing county partner. To be quite honest with you, I think it's a testament to their partnership with us for them to be willing to locate an incinerator, to operate an incinerator within their municipal landfill. I feel very confident that they are in this not only to help Fayette County, but to help the state as a whole deal with these carcasses. I'm confident they will take carcasses from all over the affected zone.
Good, I would hope so, with us helping to the extent we are, so, thank you.
Anybody else, questions?
Handle, and based on
I don't, Commissioner, respectfully, no. I don't think that we can say with any degree of certainty that this machine is going to cover the need entirely. What I can tell you is it is a big step in a positive direction for dealing with the carcasses. Whether it's able to handle all of it, I can't say that.
All right, and that kind of depends on our ability to put storage up there and if we can burn carcasses in through March, and work through them as they come in. There's just a lot of variables there. But
The reality is right now we have nothing we have no asset that actually can incinerate carcasses or chemically digest carcasses to a point where we're destroying prions. This will provide us with an option. However we have to do it to make it the most efficient, we will now have an option to destroy prions, which doesn't exist right now.
all right. Commissioner Woods?
Chris, I'm just assuming that Fayette County would be willing to take these carcasses at no cost to the TWRA. Is that correct?
I would say there would be no cost to the TWRA. I think that's probably likely that the heads and material that we would utilize the facility for, I think we can probably work that out. It's not something I specifically talked to the mayor about. I do expect there to be some charge for the disposal of carcasses in order for them to, from processors, for example. So, and that's not something processors are unaccustomed to. When they were sending their waste stream to the landfills, they're paying for that service. So I would expect some level of cost associated with this disposal method to be passed on to those processors, taxidermists, or those folks that need disposal.
So, but the test data, say what we have left over once we test the carcass, I'm assuming it would go to this incinerator in the end as well. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking, there wouldn't be any direct charge to the agency for disposing of that material.
I think that certainly would be our position with Fayette County and a conversation we would need to have, but I haven't spoken directly with the mayor or gotten that far down the track. But I would think that they would be willing to help us out in that regard.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Sanders.
Chris, just to make sure, this $1 million expansion we're going to address shortly is simply procurement,
Yes, sir.
and it is an 1,800-degree incinerator.
Well, I should say it's both procurement of the incinerator itself and site preparation at Fayette County. These incinerators, I believe Dan Grove told me the one at Cord Lab weighs approximately 80,000 pounds, 85,000 pounds. It takes a very significant concrete slab to set that on. There needs to be some level of roof system, maybe conveyors and other things that go along with the incinerator. But yes, sir, to answer your question directly, it is for the site prep and procurement and installation of an incinerator.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Chris? All right, and I guess the Budget Committee will be voting on this, but just from a Wildlife Committee standpoint, just a show of support. I know I'm for it, and I know we need it. We got to have something different than what we're doing now. So I appreciate the briefing, and thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission.
And Chairman, that concludes Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner. We're going to move right into Budget Committee. Commissioner Sanders, if it's all right, I'd ask that you take this up first, since we're already on it.
I was fine. I was going to ask to swap it up. You've heard the ask in the other committee, in the Wildlife Committee. So at this point, I'll take a motion in the Budget Committee to provide an expansion of $1 million to acquire and install a incinerator.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion?
I second the motion.
Have a second? On the committee, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right. Call Frank Fiss.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I've got a single budget request today. We've received a donation from Trout Unlimited's Hiwassee River chapter in the amount of $20,000. These funds would go to a Region 3 budget to work on southern Appalachian brook trout in the next couple of years. A little background on this funding, what we would be using this funding for. We've had a couple decades history of working on southern Appalachian brook trout, and this structure sits on Tellico Hatchery, and it's a place where brook trout that are collected from really around the region. Sometimes we'll go to North Carolina or Georgia even to get the right genetic stock for the fish that we want to put in the right places in Tennessee. And the fish are collected in the field from places where we know the genetics of the brook trout population that's there. And adult fish are taken back to that hatchery building, and they're kept there until they're reproductively ready to produce more brook trout. And that process goes where the gametes are mixed in a lab setting to maximize production, and those eggs are kept in that same little shack there for some time until they hatch, and eventually they'll spend a whole cycle in that facility where they're reared up to a stocking size when they're stocked typically in the springtime. And like this example here, these fish are going back to a water that probably had southern strain brook trout years ago, but were lost due to habitat degradation or other species being put on top of them. So the project that is ongoing now, we took fish out of Gulf Fork Creek in the Big Creek watershed, which is Cocke County, and these fish are going to be stocked in the Trail Fork or branch, whichever it is, but it's also a stream in that big creek watershed of Cotton County. So the funds will help, and here's a brook trout that be ready for harvest or catch and release, or maybe make more brook trout. But the funds that we're going to get are going to be used to sponsor or pay for a temporary employees at that facility. Usually one person is hired to help with the seasonal demands of caring for these fish or collecting and stocking the fish. And there's another benefit is that the funding will fix some water quality issues we have there. We've got a high nitrogen problem, which is a naturally occurring issue with using surface water. And we've got some new technology that we're going to try, and these funds will help us do that. We've got some of them in place already where it's stripping out the nitrogen from the water very nicely and increasing the oxygen that these fish need for production. So that's the kinds of things we're going to do with those funds, and we'll, tomorrow we will have people from the Trout Unlimited's Hiwassee chapter present to thank them in person for their donation. That's all I have.
Thank you, Frank. So I need a motion to expand the fiscal year 20 budget by $20,000 to accept this donation from Hiwassee Chapter Trout Unlimited. Have a second? Second. Have a first, second. Any discussions? On the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Call Ken Tarkington to the lectern. I got still just a little bit of thunder. You're about to see a budget presentation that is a little different than you've seen in the past. I want to personally thank Ken for tolerating me on a Friday afternoon for several hours to get this, but I think once you see it, I think it provides more information than we've had in the past and a little bit easier to understand. So, Ken, thank you so much for the work.
Yes, sir. As Commissioner Sanders said, we worked on this at his direction to try to streamline it to give you the most at the least amount of presentation. There are still 2 pages. Well, actually, there were 3 in the past, but with what you're looking at now, it's in a not a similar format, but perhaps similar presentation in that the boating in this report is at the top of the page as well as it was in the previous. And what we've done is we've identified both in the boating and the wildlife fund the income from boat registrations in boating and then the license sales in wildlife as where we are at this point in time in the year with what we've collected versus what we've estimated. And then the same thing on the expense for both funds. And as you can see at the top of the page, boating, where $163,000 less than our projected boat registration income through the month of October. And all of this will be through the month of October, fiscal year July through October. The expense of the boating fund is approximately 17.7% of the annual allotment that the Commission has approved. In the middle of the page, the wildlife fund, the license income is $31,000 less. That's less than 0.5%. We would say that would be flat through October. And the expense through October is almost 23% of the annual allotment. The wetlands acquisition includes both the acquisition to buy property and the maintenance to maintain the properties that Tennessee Wildlife owns and is reimbursed through this fund. The balance through October is $16,802,000. Now the second page, the last page, identifies 2 things. It identifies, or I guess really 3, it identifies those funds that we have invested with the Treasury. The Treasury has invested for us. It also identifies those balances and potential income, and when I say potential, it's what that investment is worth at the end of October for the through the fiscal year. And it also includes on the far right, the last two columns, the SPIF balance, that is the State Pool Investment Fund. That's the amount of money that's not invested with the Treasury, but is still in our reserve. And then the last column, total reserve, is self-explanatory. That's the total amount of the four funds reserves at the end of October. I included also at the right under that section where it says the SPIF is currently earning, and I think you may be seeing I can't see that far. Is it two, how much? Okay. It went, the day after this was sent to you, I got an updated for October, and it is 2.02. Since then, I've received the one for November, and it's 1.84. So that would be the current amount of interest earned on those funds not invested. That would be the dollars under that SPIF balance column. Any questions, comments?
Hearing none, thank you, Ken.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanders, and great job on the report. I think it was easy to interpret as for all of us non-CPAs group. Yes. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back in and finish up. So we'll be back in at about 2:35.
funny about it. Okay.
And I won't have any mileage this time.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Outlook. You don't have to load everything. I just want to send an email. New message. What is this state employee thing she sent to Scott?
Emergency contact.
Do I have to do anything? I haven't read it.
Yeah, you can later. Just push CWD.
CWD. Attach. Browse this computer.
All right, we'll get back in it. I meant to during the Wildlife Committee, being in this end of the state and having Dan Gibbs here. Dan, could you give us just a short update of the bear season?
So to date, the harvest is 415, which is about 55% of what we harvested last year, which was a record by almost 200 bears. So we weren't expecting anything near what we had last year. The mass crop is pretty good, so the bears aren't moving as much, but hunters are chasing bears, the ones I've spoken with. And that 415, I think it's going to come up a little bit. There's some issues with how some of the data is being analyzed in the system. So I think we'll probably end up around 450 or so, maybe a little bit higher. And as far as the zones go, the one zone that it gets a lot of interest, especially right here, is Zone 2, which is Blount, Sevier, and a little bit of Cott County. They're only at 36% of what they killed last year, which is what we typically see in years where we have good mass crop. The bears just aren't coming out of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and they're not available for harvest. So that just verifies that. And then up on the north end, Zone 1 up in the Tri-Cities area, they're at about 71% of what they harvested last year. So they're having a lot of bears moving up there still, and they've killed over 218 bears to this point. So.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
How many more days of hunting is there for bear season? How many more days?
It depends on the zone. Zone 3 down here runs till the 16th, I believe, and then up on the north end, their second segment or third segment's a little bit longer. So we're about in the middle of the third segment of the season right now, and it runs anywhere from 15 to 22, 23 days, depending on which zone you're in.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to call on Commissioner Box, who's the Vice Chairman of our Retention and Recruitment Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to call on Mr. Don King, our Multimedia Development Officer.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share some good news about a new tool we're adding to our communications effort. And part of my new job duties, as you stated, Madam Chairman, is the development part, the multimedia development. And we have come up with a new television show that we've put together in-house. It's pulled from footage we've had, from stories that have been aired on social media so far and that kind of thing. I'm just going to step back just a second and kind of give you a bit of a history lesson. Not really history lesson. It made me think of Ken Tarkington history lesson. It's not quite like that, but I enjoy Ken's history lessons. I do. But anyway, I wanted to just step back a second and remind everybody that we had about 15 years of a run with a television show called Tennessee's Wild Side, and that was produced for us, and we participated. Our folks were heavily involved in the stories, and we went out with them. And but anyway, we worked with the producers at the Renaissance Center to do that show for about 15 years. And then following that, a new RFP went out, and we worked with another production company out of Knoxville called Design Sensory, and had a show called Tennessee Uncharted on the air for 3 years. Through those efforts, we've gathered a lot of great B-roll footage as well. And a few years ago, when it was time for Doug Markham, our communications guy from Region 2, to move up to the Nashville office, his vacancy was filled with a young man named Barry Cross, who had worked on Tennessee's Wild Side as videographer for many years. So that's kind of his background is video, creating stories, and he just does a wonderful job. And I started seeing all the new material that he was producing for Region 2 primarily, but occasionally he'd venture out of his region and produce some new things for other things statewide. And got to thinking, we just see these for a little while on social media, we ought to be able to repurpose these. So here comes the development part. We decided that we could pool our resources here and start with what Barry has created and work toward creating a television show. So we've Todd Mazzaris has been able to pull a lot of those story segments together and create a great open and some other elements that it takes to put a full television show together. And so anyway, kudos to Todd for helping do that. And we look to, as we progress with the television show, we would like to incorporate, of course, a lot more stories statewide and get input and material from our regional information coordinators out in the various regions, and there'll be some training going on to help accommodate that as well. And so anyway, we're really excited about it. During the course of our previous 2 television shows, we got great play from the PEG TV channels. And I don't know if you're familiar with those or not, but public education and government channels. A lot of the local communities have these channels that are really looking for material. And they really utilized a lot of our previous show. I kind of tossed a carrot out to them to see what the interest level was. They said, send it to us. So I've given them a little bit of a preview, and they're really enthusiastic about it. So we'll be starting on about a dozen of those stations, as well as doing premieres on YouTube and Facebook and other social platforms. So anyway, that's about all I have right now to give you in the way of an update. I might be leaving some things out, but we prepared just about a little 3-minute piece to give you a little taste of what the show's going to be about and give you a feel for it. But we do have 13 episodes edited in the can, ready to go. So they'll be being distributed in the next little while. So you'll be seeing and hearing more about those. And if I can get Rich to cue up the video piece, we will show that, and then I'll be glad to answer any questions if there are any. Thanks for watching. How many wildlife species are there in our state? Well, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency counts more than 1,300. From salamanders and songbirds to bass and black bears, the TWRA has the responsibility of managing all these species. So the next time you purchase a license to hunt or fish, rest assured, you are investing in programs that support all wildlife. On this episode of Tennessee Outdoor Journal, we will learn about a place that specializes in rescuing orphaned bear cubs and get an update on how these creatures are doing in our state. We'll join the Streams crew as they electrofish and take inventory of the diverse aquatic species that inhabit a pristine Middle Tennessee stream. Barry Cross will do his best to keep up with our biologists searching the rock crevices of Bear Hollow Mountain for the elusive green salamander. We'll learn about the National Archery in the Schools program and how it is quickly becoming a Tennessee school competitive tradition. Then check the progress of our agency's restoration efforts of the prehistoric lake sturgeon to Tennessee waters. And who would have ever thought that burning a field could be good for bees and butterflies? Tennessee Outdoor Journal is opening the cover and inviting you in for a behind-the-scenes look at the work being done every day by your Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. Let's turn the page. What kind of legacy will we leave when our days upon this earth are gone? Tell me who will carry on this work that we've begun. Care enough to be the keeper of the dream. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Tennessee Outdoor Journal. Our first story of the day is titled Bears in Tennessee.
A little over 20 years ago, ABR was permitted to start rehabbing orphaned cubs and injured or malnourished yearling bears. Most of those have come from Tennessee and the Smoky Mountains National Park. There's been a handful from other states, but the program was...
And then it goes on from there. So anyway, that's just a short little teaser for you.
Rude to cut Dan off like that.
I know. I apologize. I was glad he was able to give that report today, so that was good. But that's all I have, so thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Don King. And I think that's a great idea to do this and implement that. There's so many things as people will say, well, TWRA, well, that's hunting or that's fishing. And to see the extent of what the agency does is unbelievable. And I just think that a lot of people don't understand and really know what all goes on. And social media we've done and the radio shows, that's really been a good educational piece to get out for the public. So I think that's a good addition.
All right.
Y'all have any questions?
I do. On this, these PEG channels, are they available on Dish Network, DirecTV, through Comcast, or do you?
They should be. And I'm thinking that a lot of the reason that these channels came into being was from when a Comcast comes into a community and says, we want to do your cable. Part of the deal is they have to designate a couple of those channels that they provide for the public access to have programming like this. So yes, you should be able to, and I'd be glad to help you find those in your area if we need to look around. I know Wilson County Television in your area is going to cover the show.
Yeah, I understand that, and as far as like Comcast, I kind of get that because they've got to put their cables in and stuff like that. But satellite is not as intrusive, and they don't offer quite as many the local channels like that. And I was just wondering how big a percentage of the audience do you think is out there on satellite rather than cable or something that has access to those channels without an antenna, a separate antenna?
Yeah, we'll be trying to expand that as much as we can and try to just get the word out to folks that they can access these on YouTube. They can watch them on their TV. Most all the newer smart TVs they can access and watch from there off the internet. So, but
thanks.
You bet.
Any other questions? Okay, that concludes retention and recruitment. Thank y'all.
Thank you,
Chairman Holbert.
Commissioner Box. Director Carter, do you have anything before we're dismissed or adjourned? Well, you're quiet today. Ain't like you stayed up late or something. Is there any comments from the public? All right. If we're going to adjourn, we'll let the cameras go off. Then we're going to make a presentation. So we'll call this meeting adjourned. Am I good?